So apparently members of the left are back at it again with one of their favorite pastimes, destroying history and removing statues. So apparently in New York City, the commission just voted to get rid of a Thomas Jefferson statue from the New York City Council chamber that's planning to take place before the end of the year. So yes, we're back to, of course, tearing down statues. Now don't forget, they were also so upset that apparently a George Floyd statue was vandalized just recently. But of course, when it comes to a Thomas Jefferson statue, oh, we can't have that up. We can build a statue of George Floyd, but we can't build a statue to Thomas Jefferson, one of our founding fathers. So right over here, I got the story from the New York Post. Again, commission votes to oust Thomas Jefferson statue from New York City Council chamber by the end of the year. A city council commission voted to remove the statue of Thomas Jefferson from the city council chamber by the end of the year, though the body is still debating on where to send the monument to the founding father. The Public Design Commission voted unanimously Monday to banish the nation's third president from the legislative chamber at City Hall after 4 lawmakers testified that his status as a slaveholder was an affront to the council's many African American members. Yes, he was a slave owner. You know who else was a slave owner? Every single person who lived around this time period almost. Anyone who could afford a slave at this time period had a slave practically, all right? God, I hate how we always have to look at it this way. Things that happened historically are not going to uphold to our same moral standards of today. We don't sit there and criticize, or we don't, what's the best way of putting this? You know what? Old lesson I learned. When we're looking at historical figures, all right, we try to look for historical figures that help move our moral compass more true north, not pull it further south, all right? So if you had the moral compass and you want to point north, which people in their time, based on their society, helped pull that compass more true north? Thomas Jefferson, through his ideas of individual freedom and liberty, obviously pulled it way far north, right? Huge impact. His owning slaves, it didn't pull it south, it just stayed steady, right? Back at that time, that was a very appropriate thing to do. It was no problem. You were allowed to own slaves. Guess what? In Africa, they owned tons of slaves. The word slave comes from Slavic. All right, a lot of the slaves were mostly white. There was a time, one of the biggest slave trades ever in the world history was the Muslim slave trade after they went and conquested much of Europe, right? Don't forget, they came up from Africa and decimated so much of Europe and took tons of white slaves back to Africa. Right? Slavery isn't a white or black thing. Slavery is just a slavery thing, right? People have been owning people since the dawn of time. People still own people. It's terrible. It's awful. It's amazing it's still allowed to exist. But guess where it exists? It exists in places like Africa to this day. The sex slave is still alive and well in places in South America. And it still exists in a lot of different countries all through Asia. You know where the slave trade doesn't exist? Is not at all endorsed by any major country? That's right. It's in the West. The West is the best, right? We got rid of slavery, and we're the only real society that's really been able to firmly get rid of slavery. We're the only society to ever really do it. If you look at Africa, tons of slaves. You look at Asia, not as many, but still a decent amount. When you look at South America, listen, anyone who's actually gone and traveled through South America knows, yes, there is slave trade in South America, mostly run through the cartels, all right? You only have to go through just go visit Mexico for a few days and just talk to the locals. You'll figure that out real quickly, right? West is the best. We're the only society to ever get rid of slaves. And to sit there and say, you know what, this man owned slaves at one point, so we're going to hate on him. No, he owned them at a point where it was legal to own them, all right? We can't sit there and expect people of the past to have the same moral values that we have today. It's absolute lunacy is what it is. So let's keep going further on here. We acknowledge that the piece needs to be removed from the City Council chamber, said the Commission President Seg Nielsen. We as a Commission will act before the end of 2021 in finding an appropriate location where it remains in the public realm. Okay, so you can't have it there, but you still want it in public, which shows this is all bull, right? It's all BS. The 9-member commission, whose members are mayoral appointees, had originally scheduled a vote to loan the 1833 printed plaster statue of the Declaration of Independence author to New York Historical Society The origins or the original remains in the U.S. Capitol. But Nielsen said she was opposed to that plan crafted by the council members because the society is a private institution that charges $22 entrance fee. Public art, public art to me means public. I mean, I agree, not pay to see. The historical monument was gifted to the city in 1834 by Uriel Phillips Levy, the nation's first Jewish naval commodore and admirer of Jefferson's belief in religious freedom. See, again, this is an example of something that he did to help pull that compass more true north. He expanded things like religious freedom, or was very avid for religious freedom, right? We wouldn't have that today if not for people like him, which is why we applaud him. All right, he didn't pull the moral compass further south. Slavery was already allowed. He kept that steady, just to whatever the Times said. But in so many other ways, he pulled that compass more true north, and religious freedom was a big part of that. Members of the public and commission suggest different venues for the statue, including the governor's room in City Hall just across the city's chambers, and the New York Public Library, which has a copy of the Declaration of Independence in Jefferson's handwriting. That's actually kind of cool. Actually, that would actually be a good place to probably put it, right? Right there with a copy of the Declaration of Independence. That's pretty good. But again, the fact they even feel threatened by a statue of a founding father, to me, shows that we got a long ways to go here, right? These people are psychotic. You should not be an elected official in America if you don't have any respect for the founding fathers. Assemblyman Charles Barron, Democrat in Brooklyn, who first took up the quest to remove Jefferson from the council chamber 20 years ago. Good God. See, this is how far back this has gone. They've been wanting to do this forever. They've been wanting to do this for so long. This dude's been trying this for 20 years. 20 years he's been trying to remove a statue of Jefferson. This is not new. That's why I keep saying, this is not new. This has been going on for so long. So many people in the Democrats Party have been thinking this way. The issue is no one acknowledged them, and now they're finally getting, the respect they deserve. Their opinions are becoming more mainstream as in the Democrat Party. All right, they're not mainstream when it comes to the public as a whole, but in the Democrat Party, these nut jobs are now becoming the mainstream. But for 20 years, this person has been trying to do this. When he said when he was a member, said the revolutionary hero could go in the trash heap for all he cared. Again, complete disrespect to the founding fathers. I think he should be put in storage somewhere, destroyed, or whatever. He was a slave-owning pedophile. Okay, let's clear something up real quick. So we all know the issue with him and, of course, Sally Hemings, right? This accusation that, of course, he had relations with a slave that he owned, and she was like 14, he was like 44. The reality is though that has been in a lot of taught in a lot of schools and is in a lot of books. The reality is in 1998, when they actually tested the genetic, material to see, hey, are these people descendants from the Jefferson family? When they looked at Sally Hemings' surviving relatives, they didn't have a direct DNA sample of Jefferson. The only thing you could really find from it was, okay, so these people are related to the Jefferson family. It doesn't mean it was Thomas Jefferson in particular. It could have been one of a dozen Jeffersons who fathered a child with this woman. All right, we don't know who it was. Now, is that bad? Should that have happened to this woman? Of course not. All right, we acknowledge slavery is bad, right? Slavery is awful. We get this. But we don't know Thomas Jefferson did it. We just don't. It's not proven. All we know is that someone who's a part of the Jefferson family had relations with this slave. That's all we know. And that's horrible. That's awful. And maybe it was Jefferson. We don't know. That's the issue. So tearing down a statue because, he might have done something. And it's so much of the left, right? No due process when it comes to the people who are still living. And of course, if we even have just anything that we can get someone on the pass for, well, we got get rid of them as well. The reality is, again, he could have done this with this slave. He totally could have. All right, it was a different time. There's a chance he probably could have. But we don't know that for sure. We have no idea. And again, that's not what we celebrate him for. He was a flawed man. Everyone's a flawed man. And he lived in a society that was much more fallen than today's society. They didn't... Again, the idea that slaves should be treated as, individuals with, their, all their liberties and all their rights protected was not firmly established in that time period anywhere. Anywhere. I don't care if you were in America, if you were in Africa, if you were in Asia, if you were in South America. It doesn't matter. That never would have crossed the mind of anyone across the world to respect the rights of a slave. So again, his moral compass stayed the same for the society that he was in for that issue. And again, that's assuming that he had relations with Sally Heming. Again, we don't know for sure. It could have been one of his relatives. We just don't know. Either way, though, even if it is him, that doesn't discount the good he did. All right, yes, he's a flawed man. Should we teach it? Well, I mean, maybe we should teach about the idea of, yes, there's this controversy, but we should also still hold him up as a founding father who did so much to advance the idea of individual liberty that would one day lead to the freeing of the slaves, that would one day lead to a more fair country as a whole where all rights are respected, as much as we can, obviously, because obviously the Democrats have been trying to push against a lot of our rights of privacy and medical decisions recently, but that's another issue. So, University of Oxford historian Raymond Levator countered that Jefferson should be removed from the council chambers but kept in the seat of government in a public space. He testified that Jefferson is a massively flawed human being who was not being honored as a saint, but for his ideas about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I mean, that's, basically what I said. I won't say massively flawed, I'll say he's flawed. The society he lived in was flawed. But you know what? Because he had a slave, I can't stand him. He's a terrible human being, awful human being. No, because everyone had slaves back then. It's ridiculous. We recognize the flaws that people had, but we also put them in the time that they existed in, right? If in that time something was normal, we can't really fault someone too much for participating in it. We then hold up the people who, of course, moved that compass more north, right? The people who said, hey, you know what, slavery is wrong? They really moved the compass further north. That's excellent. That's awesome. I believe it was one of the Catos. It was either the younger or the elder. I think it was Cato the elder who had an interesting idea. He said that slavery does just as much damage to the person holding the slave as the person who is enslaved. And obviously it's not entirely true, but his reasoning was that the mental gymnastics you have to do to justify owning another human being is pretty substantial, right? That it does harm our mental state. And it was someone who, of course, lived so far back, and because of that, you have to look at it and go, wow, what an amazing revelation. And the reason we say it's amazing, even though it's something that we take for granted today, is because at that time, it wasn't taken for granted, right? It was where he lived. It's how they lived. This idea that we're going to start canceling Thomas Jefferson, well, guess what? We're going to cancel then George Washington, Benjamin Franklin. We're going to cancel every founding father there is if we continue down this road. But what do you think, of course? Leave a comment below. I don't even know what to say. It's just, it's insane. It is completely insane that we're even having this discussion. And again, apparently this person has been trying this for 20 years, and just now the left has finally become just insane enough to actually do it. That should say a lot right there. But of course, again, what do you think about it? As well as, of course, if you've enjoyed the video, hey, leave a thumbs up, like the video, helps out a lot. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and we'll be talking again real soon.